We used that money. Those 3 words, spoken so casually by my mother over pot roast and mashed potatoes, shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. The inheritance my grandmother left specifically for my surgery, the money that represented my chance at a normal life without constant pain, had vanished. And my family had taken it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Martinez, and I am 28 years old. I work as a senior data analyst for Meridian Financial Group in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. For the past 6 years, I have lived with a condition called severe endometriosis that has progressively worsened despite every conservative treatment my doctors have attempted. The pain has become debilitating, affecting my ability to work, sleep, and maintain any semblance of normal life. 3 months ago, my specialist finally recommended surgery that could significantly improve my quality of life, possibly even save my fertility before the disease caused irreversible damage. The procedure was not covered by my insurance, and the out-of-pocket cost was $38,000. It was a staggering amount, one I could never have afforded on my own despite my decent salary and careful budgeting. But then my grandmother passed away and everything changed. Or so I thought. My grandmother, Rosa Martinez, died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 84, 6 months before that terrible family dinner. She had been the matriarch of our family, the woman who held everyone together through sheer force of will and unconditional love. She had immigrated to the United States from Mexico when she was 19 years old with nothing but a suitcase and determination. She worked as a seamstress for 40 years, saved every penny she could, bought a small house in a working-class neighborhood, and raised 3 children mostly on her own after my grandfather died young. She was the strongest person I had ever known, and I loved her more than I could express. 2 weeks after her funeral, her attorney contacted me to schedule a private meeting. I remember sitting in his office, confused about why I had been called in separately from the rest of the family. The attorney, a kind-faced man named Mr. Hernandez who had known my grandmother for decades, slid a folder across his desk toward me. Inside was a letter written in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting, along with legal documents I did not immediately understand. The letter began with words I can still recite from memory, because I have read them so many times since that day. "My dearest Elena," she had written, "if you are reading this, I am gone, and I hope you remember me with love rather than sadness. I am writing to you privately because I have watched you suffer with your illness for years now, and I know how much it has cost you, not just in pain but in dreams deferred and opportunities lost. I have set aside money specifically for your medical care, money that no one else in the family knows about. This is not their money. This is yours for your health, for your future, for the life you deserve to live without constant suffering. The amount is $40,000, which I hope will be enough to get you the treatment you need. Please use it wisely, use it for yourself, and do not let anyone convince you that you do not deserve this help. You have always been the one who takes care of everyone else, but now it is time for you to take care of yourself. I love you always, Abuela." I sat in that office and cried, overwhelmed by her generosity and foresight, by the fact that she had understood my situation so completely and had taken steps to help me even after she was gone. Mr. Hernandez explained that my grandmother had created a specific bequest separate from her main estate, one that designated the money exclusively for my medical expenses. The funds had been placed in a special account with my mother listed as the trustee since I would need someone to manage the disbursement of funds directly to medical providers. The arrangement was designed to ensure the money went only toward my healthcare and nothing else. My grandmother had been very clear about that stipulation in her legal instructions. I should have questioned that arrangement then. I should have asked why my mother needed to be the trustee rather than the money simply being transferred to me directly. But I was grieving and overwhelmed, and I trusted my mother completely. She was my mother. Why would I not trust her? Mr. Hernandez assured me that this arrangement was common for medical bequests, and that my mother had already been notified of her responsibilities as trustee. He gave me copies of all the documents and told me to have my surgeon's office contact him directly when I was ready to schedule the procedure. The money would be transferred to the medical facility to cover the costs, and any remaining funds would come to me afterward. I left that office feeling something I had not felt in years. I felt hope. Real, tangible hope that I could finally address this disease that had stolen so much from me, that I could finally live without constant pain, that I could finally plan for a future that included more than just survival. I called my mother that evening to talk about the gift grandmother had left me, expecting her to share in my relief and gratitude. Her response should have been my first warning sign, but I was too caught up in my own emotions to notice the strangeness of it. "Oh yes, Mr. Hernandez told me about that," she had said, her tone oddly flat. "We will figure out the details later. Right now we are all just trying to process losing your grandmother." Then she changed the subject before I could ask any questions about how the trustee arrangement would work. I told myself she was grieving, and that we would discuss the logistics when everyone had recovered from the immediate shock of loss. I had time after all. My surgery was not scheduled yet, and I wanted to wait until after the holidays before undergoing a procedure that would require several weeks of recovery. The months passed. I met with my surgeon, Dr. Patricia Chun, who reviewed my case thoroughly and confirmed that I was an excellent candidate for the surgery. She explained the procedure in detail, the expected recovery timeline, and the realistic outcomes I could anticipate. For the first time in years, a doctor was offering me something beyond pain management and coping strategies. She was offering me the possibility of genuine relief, of getting my life back. We scheduled the surgery for early March, which would give me time to arrange medical leave from work and prepare everything I would need for recovery. Dr. Chen's office would contact Mr. Hernandez to arrange payment, and everything would be handled professionally and efficiently. I felt like I was finally taking control of my health after years of feeling helpless against a disease that was slowly consuming my life. I should have followed up with my mother about the money. I should have asked for statements or documentation showing that the funds were secure and ready to be disbursed. But I did not want to seem like I did not trust her, and I convinced myself that everything was fine because Mr. Hernandez had assured me the arrangements were proper and legal. My mother was the trustee. She knew the money was designated for my surgery. There was no reason to worry. Except there was every reason to worry, and I was about to learn exactly how naive I had been. The family dinner happened on a Sunday evening in late February, just 2 weeks before my scheduled surgery date. My mother had called earlier that week to invite me over, saying she wanted the whole family together for a nice meal before I went into the hospital. It seemed like a thoughtful gesture, a way for everyone to show support before I underwent a major procedure. I arrived at my parents' house around 5 in the evening, carrying a bottle of wine and feeling genuinely grateful that my family wanted to gather for me. The house smelled like the pot roast my mother made for special occasions, and I could hear voices and laughter coming from the kitchen. My older brother Marcus was there with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, ages 6 and 9. My younger sister Daniela had driven up from Tucson where she attended graduate school. My father was in his usual spot in the living room, watching a basketball game with the volume too loud. It felt normal and comfortable, like 100 other family dinners I had attended throughout my life. I had no idea that in less than an hour, everything I believed about my family would be destroyed. We sat down to dinner around 6 o'clock, the dining room table crowded with serving dishes and multiple conversations happening simultaneously. My nephew was complaining about his homework, my niece was showing everyone a drawing she had made, Marcus was talking about some project at work, and Daniela was describing her thesis research. It was loud and chaotic in the way family dinners always are, and I was content to listen and eat without contributing much to the conversation. Then my father asked the question that started everything unraveling. "So Elena, when is this surgery happening? Your mother said it was coming up soon." His tone was casual, making conversation while reaching for more mashed potatoes. I swallowed my bite of pot roast and smiled, pleased that he was taking interest in something I had not been sure he fully understood. My father had never been particularly comfortable discussing medical issues, especially anything related to female health problems, so his willingness to bring it up felt like progress. 2 weeks from Tuesday, I answered. March 14th. I will be in the hospital for 2 days and then recovering at home for about 4 weeks. Dr. Chan said I should see significant improvement within a few months after that. I felt myself getting emotional as I spoke about it, overwhelmed by how close I was to finally addressing this disease that had controlled my life for so long. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for Abuela's gift. Without that money, I would never have been able to afford this procedure. She literally changed my life even after she was gone. The table went quiet. It was a sudden, complete silence that felt wrong immediately, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked up from my plate to find my mother staring at me with an expression I could not quite read. My father had stopped eating mid-bite. Marcus and Jennifer were looking at each other with obvious discomfort. Daniela was staring down at her plate like she wanted to disappear. Only the children continued eating, oblivious to the tension that had descended over the adults. "What money?" my mother asked slowly. Her voice had an edge to it that I recognized from childhood. A warning tone that meant I had said something wrong, but I did not yet know what. My stomach clenched with sudden anxiety, though I did not understand why. I was talking about my inheritance, about the money grandmother had left specifically for my medical care. Why would that create this reaction? "The money Abuela left me for the surgery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the growing dread in my chest. "The $40,000. The trustee account that you are managing." I looked directly at my mother, searching her face for some sign that she understood what I was talking about, that this was just some strange miscommunication we could quickly clear up. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. I saw guilt. I saw defensiveness. And I saw the exact moment she decided how she was going to handle this situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We used that money," she said. The words came out matter-of-fact, almost casual, as if she were telling me she had used up the milk and needed to buy more. "We had some family expenses that came up and we needed it. I am sure we can work something out for your surgery though. Maybe you can postpone it for a while until you save up enough, or you could get a payment plan with the hospital." She picked up her fork and took another bite of pot roast, as if the conversation were over and we could all return to normal dinner table talk. I sat completely frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just my perception as my brain tried to make sense of words that did not make sense. "We used that money. The inheritance my grandmother left specifically for my surgery. The money that was legally designated for my medical expenses only. The money that was supposed to be protected in a trustee account. We used that money. Family expenses. Postpone the surgery. Get a payment plan." The words tumbled through my mind without connecting to anything rational or comprehensible. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. "What do you mean you used that money? That was my inheritance. That money was specifically for my surgery. Abuela left it to me in her will." My voice was rising despite my attempts to control it, and I could feel my heart pounding so hard it seemed to shake my entire body. This could not be happening. This could not actually be happening. My mother sighed, the heavy, put-upon sigh she always used when she felt someone was being unreasonable. "Elena, do not be so dramatic. It was family money and the family needed it. Your father's truck broke down completely and we had to get him a new one. Marcus needed help with his mortgage payments for several months after Jennifer lost her job. Daniela's tuition went up and she needed help covering the difference. These were important needs, not frivolous spending. Family takes care of family. That is how we do things." I looked around the table, searching for someone who would acknowledge how insane this was. Someone who would stand up and say that what my mother had just described was theft. Marcus would not meet my eyes, suddenly very interested in cutting his meat into smaller and smaller pieces. Jennifer was staring at her wine glass like it contained the secrets of the universe. Daniela had tears running down her face but still said nothing. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably but remained silent. The children sensed something wrong and had stopped eating, looking between the adults with confused expressions. "That money was not family money," I said, forcing each word out through a throat that felt like it was closing. "That money was my money. Abuela left it specifically to me for my medical expenses, with explicit legal instructions that it could not be used for anything else. You were the trustee. That means you were supposed to manage it for me, not spend it on whatever you wanted. That is theft. You stole from me." The words hung in the air, ugly and accusatory but absolutely true. My mother's face flushed red, anger replacing the defensive guilt. "How dare you accuse me of theft? I am your mother. Everything I have done has been for this family. You have always been selfish, Elena, always thinking only of yourself. Your grandmother left that money to the family, not just to you. You just decided it was all yours because you are always the victim, always the one who needs special treatment for your supposed illness. The venom in her voice when she said supposed illness hit me like a physical blow. She had never believed me. After 6 years of watching me struggle with pain so severe it sometimes left me unable to stand, after seeing me cancel plans and miss work and spend weekends in bed with heating pads and prescription pain medication, she had never actually believed I was sick. Supposed illness? I repeated, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. I have a diagnosed medical condition. I have had multiple hospitalizations. I have test results and imaging and years of documentation from specialists. This is not in my head. And the money was not left to the family. It was left to me legally and specifically for my medical care. You cannot just decide to redistribute inheritance because you think it should be different. I turned to my father, desperate for someone to be rational. Dad, you know this is wrong. You know she cannot just take money that was designated for me and give it to everyone else. Tell her this is wrong. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, still not looking at me directly. Your mother makes the financial decisions, Elena. I do not get involved in that stuff. Maybe you should talk to that lawyer fellow if you are so concerned about it. His tone suggested that being concerned about $40,000 that had been stolen from me was somehow unreasonable, that I was creating unnecessary drama over something trivial. The betrayal from him felt almost worse than my mother's theft because it was coated in passivity, in the same deliberate blindness he had practiced my entire life whenever my mother did something questionable. Marcus. I looked at my brother, my voice breaking. You took money that was meant for my surgery to pay your mortgage? Jennifer, you let him do that? Marcus finally looked up, his face a mixture of shame and defensiveness. We were going to lose the house, Elena. We had no choice. Mom said the money was available for family emergencies, and we had an emergency. I did not know you had not agreed to it. I thought it was all worked out. His attempt to shift responsibility back to our mother would have been laughable if the situation were not so devastating. It was not worked out. I never agreed to any of this because no one ever asked me. That money was in a trust account that was supposed to be used only for my medical expenses. That was not a suggestion. That was a legal requirement. I turned to Daniela, the sister I had always felt closest to, the one I had helped through countless crises over the years. Danny, you took my surgery money for tuition? You could not get student loans like everyone else? Daniela was crying openly now, makeup running down her face in dark streaks. I am so sorry, Elena. I am so sorry. Mom said it was fine, that there was extra money and that you would not mind helping me. I did not know it was supposed to be only for you. Please believe me, I would never have taken it if I had known. But she had taken it. They had all taken it. My mother had stolen $40,000 that my grandmother had specifically set aside for my medical care, and she had distributed it among my siblings like some kind of perverse Robin Hood, taking from the sick to give to the inconvenienced. And every single one of them had accepted the money without apparently questioning where it came from, or whether this was appropriate. I felt like I was going to vomit, and the pot roast I had eaten sat in my stomach like concrete. I have surgery scheduled in 2 weeks, I said, my voice hollow now, shock beginning to set in. The surgery that was supposed to be paid for with that money. The surgery that might be my only chance at having a normal life. What am I supposed to do now? The question hung in the air, met with silence from everyone except my mother, who had apparently decided that offense was the best defense. You will figure something out, Elena. You always do. You have a good job. You can get a loan or use credit cards or something. You are being completely unreasonable about this whole thing. Acting like we committed some crime when all we did was help each other out like families are supposed to do. If you were not so selfish and self-centered, you would understand that. She stood up from the table and began collecting plates, as if the conversation were over and we could all move on now. Who wants dessert? I made flan. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over backward and crashed to the floor. Everyone jumped at the noise and my nephew started crying. I grabbed my purse and my coat, moving toward the door on legs that did not feel entirely stable. Where are you going? My mother called after me, her tone suggesting I was being childish and dramatic. We are not finished with dinner. You are making a scene in front of the children." I turned back to look at her, at all of them, sitting at that table in the house where I had grown up, the house where I had believed I was loved and valued and part of a family that cared about each other. I saw clearly for the first time that I had been wrong about all of it. My mother saw me as a resource to be managed and redistributed at her discretion. My father saw me as someone else's problem to handle. My siblings saw me as someone who would always be there to help them, but who had no right to expect the same consideration in return. And my grandmother, the only person who had truly understood that I deserved help and protection, was gone. "I am leaving," I said quietly, "and I want you all to understand something. What you did was not helping each other out. What you did was steal money that was legally mine, money that was specifically designated for medical treatment I desperately need. You did not ask me. You did not tell me. You just took what was mine and divided it up among yourselves, and now you are acting like I am the problem for being upset about it." I looked directly at my mother. "You were the trustee. You had a legal responsibility to use that money only for my medical expenses. You violated that trust and you violated the law. I do not know yet what I am going to do about this, but I do know one thing. I will never trust any of you again." I walked out the door into the cool February evening, got into my car, and drove away from my parents' house. I made it about 3 blocks before I had to pull over because I was shaking so hard I could not safely drive. I sat in my car on a residential street and cried harder than I had cried since my grandmother's funeral, great gasping sobs that seemed to tear something loose inside my chest. Everything hurt. My body hurt from the disease that was destroying me from the inside. My heart hurt from the betrayal of people I had loved and trusted. My head hurt from trying to understand how my family could have done something so cruel, and then acted like I was the unreasonable one for being devastated by it. My phone started ringing. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I declined the call. She called again. I declined again. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, from my mother, my father, Marcus, Jennifer, Daniela, even numbers I did not recognize who had apparently been recruited to tell me I was overreacting and being selfish. I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness, trying to figure out what I was going to do. My surgery was in 2 weeks. I had no money to pay for it. My family had stolen my inheritance and felt completely justified in doing so. And I was alone, more alone than I had ever felt in my entire life. But sitting in that car, drowning in grief and shock and betrayal, something else began to emerge underneath all the pain. It started as a small spark of anger, righteous and clean, burning away some of the shock and despair. They had no right to do this to me. They had no right to take what my grandmother had given me, what she had specifically protected for me, and use it for their own purposes. They had no right to dismiss my illness as if it did not matter, as if my pain and suffering were less important than a truck or mortgage payments or tuition. They had no right to expect me to just accept this theft and move on like nothing had happened. That anger grew stronger as I sat there, feeding on every memory of every time I had put my family's needs before my own, every time I had helped them financially or emotionally or practically, every time I had shown up for them without question or hesitation. And what had I received in return? Theft, dismissal, mockery of my illness, accusations of selfishness when I dared to want what was legally and morally mine. I started my car and drove home to my small apartment across town. Once inside, I turned my phone back on and ignored the flood of notifications. Instead, I searched through my files until I found the folder Mr. Hernandez had given me 6 months earlier. The folder containing my grandmother's letter and all the legal documents establishing the trust account for my medical expenses. I read through everything carefully, looking for the specific language that established the terms and restrictions. There it was, clear and unambiguous. The money was to be used solely for Elena Martinez's medical expenses related to her endometriosis condition. The trustee, Maria Elena Martinez, was legally obligated to manage the funds according to these explicit instructions. Any use of the funds for purposes other than the specified medical expenses would constitute a breach of fiduciary duty and potential grounds for legal action. My mother had violated every single term of that trust. She had stolen from me, from my grandmother's explicit wishes, and she had done it without hesitation or apparently any guilt until she got caught. I looked at the clock. It was almost 9 in the evening, too late to call Mr. Hernandez's office. But first thing Monday morning, I would contact him and I would find out exactly what my legal options were. I would find out how to recover what had been stolen from me. And I would find out how to make sure my family could never do this to me again. I had spent my entire life trying to be a good daughter, a good sister, a supportive family member who put others' needs first. And where had that gotten me? It had gotten me robbed and dismissed and blamed for being upset about it. That ended now. I did not know exactly what I was going to do or how I was going to navigate this catastrophe, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done protecting people who had never protected me. I was done sacrificing for people who saw my sacrifices as nothing more than their due. I was done being the family resource to be exploited whenever convenient. My family had made a choice when they stole my inheritance. Now I was going to make choices of my own, and they were not going to like them. But for the first time in my life, what my family liked or did not like was no longer my primary concern. My health was my primary concern. My future was my primary concern. My right to the inheritance my grandmother had left specifically for me was my primary concern. Everything else could wait. I had 2 weeks until my surgery date, surgery I could no longer afford because my family had stolen the money that was supposed to pay for it. 2 weeks to figure out how to recover what was mine, how to hold my family accountable, and how to somehow still get the medical treatment that might save me from a lifetime of progressive disability and pain. Felt impossible, but giving up felt worse. So I would not give up. I would fight. I would fight for myself with the same energy I had always devoted to fighting for my family. Except this time I would be fighting against them. And this time, I would not let guilt or obligation or the fear of being called selfish stop me from doing what needed to be done. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across the walls as cars passed by outside, my mind replaying the dinner conversation over and over like a horror film stuck on repeat. Each time I remembered my mother's casual tone when she said, "We used that money." I felt a fresh wave of rage and disbelief wash over me. How could she have been so callous? How could she have taken something that was specifically meant to help me with a serious medical condition and distributed it to my siblings as if it were her money to give away? The betrayal cut deeper than I had words to express, and beneath the anger was a grief so profound it felt like drowning. I thought about my grandmother, about Rosa Martinez who had worked her fingers raw in garment factories so her children could have better lives than she had. She had been barely 5 feet tall, her hands permanently curved from decades of repetitive motion, her back bent from years of hunching over sewing machines in poorly ventilated workshops. But her spirit had been unbreakable, her love for her family absolute, and her determination to provide for us legendary in our community. She had never complained, never asked for recognition, never expected anything in return for the countless sacrifices she made. She simply gave and gave because that was who she was. My grandmother had understood struggle in a way my mother never had. My mother had grown up in America with a mother who worked constantly to ensure her children never went hungry, never lacked for school supplies, never felt the poverty that had defined my grandmother's childhood in rural Mexico. My mother had graduated from high school, something my grandmother never had the opportunity to do. She had married my father when she was 22, and he had provided a stable middle-class life with a house in a decent neighborhood, cars that ran, vacations every few years, and enough money that financial stress was occasional rather than constant. My mother had never known what it meant to truly struggle, to work until your body broke down, to sacrifice everything for the possibility that your children might have better opportunities. And perhaps that was why she felt so entitled to redistribute my grandmother's gift as if it were her inheritance rather than mine. I thought about my own relationship with my grandmother, how different it had been from my relationship with my mother. My grandmother had always seen me as a complete person, someone with my own dreams and needs and right to pursue happiness. She had been proud when I graduated from college, the first in our family to do so. She had celebrated when I got my job at Meridian Financial, understanding that my degree in mathematics and my analytical skills had opened doors she could never have imagined walking through herself. She had listened when I talked about my work, asking questions that showed genuine interest, even when she did not fully understand the technical details of what I did. She had been the one person in my family who seemed to believe I was valuable not for what I could provide to others, but simply for who I was. When I was first diagnosed with endometriosis 6 years ago, My grandmother had been the only family member who truly grasped the seriousness of the condition. My mother had dismissed it as bad periods that I should just learn to manage better. My father had been uncomfortable discussing anything related to female reproductive health, and changed the subject whenever I tried to explain what I was dealing with. My siblings had been sympathetic in an abstract way but had not really understood why I kept canceling plans or why I was exhausted all the time. But my grandmother had done her research. She had gone to the library and asked the librarians to help her find books about endometriosis. She had watched videos online at the community center that offered computer classes for seniors. She had educated herself about my condition because she wanted to understand what I was going through. I remembered one conversation we had about 2 years after my diagnosis, sitting on her tiny back porch drinking the strong sweet coffee she made in an old percolator that was older than I was. The pain had been particularly bad that week, and I had missed 3 days of work. I was scared I might lose my job, scared about the medical bills that were piling up despite having insurance, scared that my life would never be more than this cycle of pain and temporary relief and more pain. I had been crying, something I tried never to do in front of my parents because it made them uncomfortable, and led to lectures about having a positive attitude and not dwelling on problems. My grandmother had taken my hand in both of hers, those small rough hands that had worked so hard for so many years, and she had looked at me with eyes that held both sorrow and fierce determination. Mija, she had said, using the term of endearment that made me feel loved and protected even as an adult, you are strong like I was strong. You are fighting a battle that no one can see, and that makes it even harder because people do not understand. But you will survive this. You will find a way through it. And when you are old like me, you will look back and be proud that you did not let this thing destroy you. I had asked her how she could be so sure, how she knew I would make it through when some days I was not sure I wanted to keep fighting. She had smiled, a sad knowing smile that suggested she understood that feeling better than I realized. Because you have to, Mija. Because the alternative is to give up and let the pain win, and you are not the kind of person who gives up. You are my granddaughter. You have my blood in your veins. And we do not surrender. Then she had told me something I had not known, something she had never shared with anyone else in the family. When she was in her 40s, she had developed severe arthritis in her hands from the repetitive work she did. The pain had been excruciating, and doctors had told her she might need to stop working, which would have meant losing the house she had worked so hard to buy, losing the stability she had built for her children. But she had found ways to manage the pain, had learned exercises and treatments, had switched to different types of sewing work that were less damaging, and had continued working for another 15 years until she could retire with her house paid off and a small savings account that gave her independence in her final years. Pain teaches you things, she had said. It teaches you what matters and what does not. It teaches you who really cares about you, and who only cares about what you can do for them. Teaches you that you are stronger than you think you are. I am not glad you have this illness, Elena. I would take it from you if I could. But I am not worried about you. You will survive this and you will be stronger for it. That conversation had sustained me through many dark days since then. When the pain made me want to give up, I would remember my grandmother's faith in me. When doctors offered treatments that did not work or suggested I just learn to live with the condition, I would remember that my grandmother had refused to accept limitations others tried to place on her. When my family made thoughtless comments about my illness or suggested I was exaggerating my symptoms, I would remember that my grandmother understood, and that her understanding mattered more than anyone else's dismissal. Now she was gone, but she had left me one final gift. She had set aside money specifically for my medical care, money that could finally get me the surgery that might actually address the root cause of my suffering rather than just managing symptoms. She had done it secretly, carefully, with legal protections in place because she must have known that my family might not respect my right to that money if they knew it existed. She had trusted my mother to act as trustee, probably because she could not imagine her own daughter would betray that trust so completely. My grandmother had believed the best about people, had believed that family meant protection and support rather than exploitation. And my mother had proven her wrong in the most devastating way possible. I thought about my history with my family, the patterns that had been established long before I was old enough to recognize them for what they were. I was the middle child, sandwiched between Marcus, who was 3 years older, and Daniela, who was 4 years younger. Marcus had always been the golden child, the son my father was proud of, The one who played sports and got decent grades without trying too hard, and who seemed to navigate life with an ease I envied. He had never been particularly ambitious or driven, but he had charm and social skills that opened doors for him. He had married Jennifer right out of college, and they had bought a house that was slightly too expensive for their income because my parents had helped with the down payment. When Marcus needed money, he simply asked and received it because that was how things had always worked for him. Daniela was the baby, the surprise child my parents had not planned for but who became my mother's favorite almost from birth. Daniela was beautiful and artistic and dramatic, someone who felt everything intensely and expressed those feelings without filter or self-consciousness. She had decided to pursue a master's degree in art history, a field with notoriously poor job prospects, but my parents supported her choice because they believed she should follow her passion. When Daniela needed money for tuition or rent or art supplies, my parents found ways to provide it because she was pursuing her dreams and dreams were important. Nobody ever seemed to worry about how Daniela would support herself after graduation, or whether she was developing any practical life skills. She was the baby, and babies got protected from harsh realities. I was neither the favored son nor the cherished baby. I was the practical one, the responsible one, the one who did not need as much attention or help because I had always been self-sufficient. From a young age, I had understood that resources in our family were limited, and that the best way to ensure I got what I needed was to need as little as possible. I had worked part-time jobs throughout high school and college, not because my parents refused to help me, but because I had observed that asking for help came with strings attached. Money came with expectations about how it should be used and judgments about whether my choices were appropriate. Support came with criticism about whether I was trying hard enough, or being too sensitive or expecting too much. It was easier to just take care of myself. This pattern of self-sufficiency had served me well in many ways. I had graduated from college with minimal debt because I had worked and applied for every scholarship I could find. I had built a successful career because I learned early that I could not rely on family connections or financial safety nets. So I needed to develop skills that would make me valuable to employers. I had become independent and capable, someone who could solve problems and navigate challenges without constant support from others. But this self-sufficiency had also created a dynamic where my family assumed I did not need help, even when I desperately did. They assumed that because I usually handled things on my own, I could always handle things on my own. They assumed that my needs were less urgent than my siblings' needs because I was less vocal about them. And they assumed that I would understand when family resources went to others rather than to me because I was the reasonable one who did not make a fuss. This dynamic had played out repeatedly throughout my adult life. When Marcus lost his job 3 years ago, my parents had loaned him $15,000 to cover his expenses until he found new employment. When I suggested that perhaps Marcus should look for work more aggressively rather than waiting for the perfect opportunity, my mother had accused me of being unsympathetic to his situation and reminded me that family helps each other during difficult times. Marcus had eventually found another job, but he had never paid back the loan. My parents had never asked him to, and they became defensive when I inquired about it, suggesting that I was being petty and small-minded to worry about money between family members. When Daniela decided to take a year off between undergraduate and graduate school to travel through Europe and find herself, my parents had funded the trip with money they had been saving for retirement. When I pointed out that they were compromising their financial security for what amounted to an extended vacation, my father had told me I was jealous because I had never done anything adventurous. The fact that I had never done anything adventurous because I had been working and building a career and trying to establish financial stability apparently did not factor into his assessment. Daniela had posted photographs from Paris and Barcelona and Rome on social media, living her best life on my parents' dime, while I worked overtime to build up my own savings account that I was too responsible to spend on international adventures. I had helped my family countless times over the years, always expecting that when I needed help in return, it would be available. I had babysat Marcus's children hundreds of times, often with little notice, so he and Jennifer could have date nights or attend events. I had helped Daniela move 4 times, hauling boxes up and down stairs and cleaning apartments she had left in disaster condition. I had loaned money to family members when they had emergencies, money that was rarely repaid and that I had learned to think of as gifts rather than loans because expecting repayment would have made me the bad guy. I had listened to my mother complain for hours about her various problems and frustrations, offering sympathy and advice that was rarely taken. I had shown up for every family birthday and holiday and obligation, even when I was exhausted or in pain, because that was what family members did. And what had my family done for me? When I was diagnosed with endometriosis and was terrified about what that meant for my future, my mother had told me to stop being dramatic and that lots of women dealt with difficult periods without making such a big deal about it. When I had been hospitalized with severe pain 2 years ago, and called my father asking if someone could pick me up when I was discharged, because I was not supposed to drive after the pain medications they had given me, he had said he was busy and suggested I call an Uber. When I had missed a family Christmas gathering because I was in too much pain to leave my apartment, my mother had called me selfish for ruining the holiday and suggested I was faking the severity of my symptoms to get attention. When I had explained to my siblings that I could no longer afford to give generous birthday and Christmas gifts because my medical expenses were consuming most of my discretionary income, they had been disappointed and hurt, as if my illness were a personal affront to them rather than something happening to me. The pattern was clear. My family was happy to accept my help, my time, my money, and my emotional labor without reciprocation. They expected me to be endlessly available to meet their needs while treating my own needs as inconvenient impositions. They had convinced themselves that this arrangement was normal and fair because they had categorized me as the strong one, the capable one, the one who did not need as much support. And I had enabled this pattern by continuing to give without demanding anything in return, by swallowing my hurt and disappointment, by telling myself that family relationships were not supposed to be transactional even as I slowly recognized that mine absolutely was transactional, just with all the transactions flowing in one direction. My grandmother had seen this dynamic. She must have seen it and understood that my family would not protect me or prioritize my needs the way they protected and prioritized each other. That was why she had created a separate bequest specifically for me, with legal language that should have prevented anyone from using the money for anything other than my medical expenses. She had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave, but she had made one critical miscalculation. She had trusted my mother to honor that protection. She had believed that her daughter would respect her explicit wishes and would manage the trust account responsibly. She could not have imagined that my mother would view that money as a family asset to be distributed at her discretion, rather than as my inheritance to be protected for its designated purpose. Now, lying awake in the early morning hours after the worst dinner of my life, I had to face the reality that my family was not what I had wanted them to be. They were not people who would protect me or support me or even respect my basic rights to my own inheritance. They were people who would take what they wanted and then blame me for being upset when I discovered the theft. They were people who valued my utility to them more than they valued me as a person. And they were people who would continue to exploit me as long as I allowed it to happen. That realization was devastating, but it was also clarifying. I could not change who my family was. I could not make them into the loving, supportive people I had always wanted them to be. But I could change how I responded to them. I could stop enabling their exploitation. I could stop prioritizing their needs over my own well-being. I could stop accepting treatment I would never tolerate if it came from strangers simply because it came from family. I could fight back. As dawn light began filtering through my bedroom curtains, I made a decision. I would not postpone my surgery as my mother had so casually suggested. I would not meekly accept the theft of my inheritance and figure out some other way to pay for medical care I desperately needed. I would not protect my family from the consequences of their actions by staying silent about what they had done. Instead, I would do everything in my power to recover the money my grandmother had left me, to hold my family accountable for their theft, and to ensure they could never do something like this to me again. I did not know yet exactly how I would accomplish those goals, but I knew where to start. I would call Mr. Hernandez first thing Monday morning, and I would tell him everything that had happened. Then I would follow whatever legal path was necessary to get justice, regardless of how much it hurt my family or damaged our relationships. Those relationships were already damaged beyond repair. My family had damaged them when they stole from me, and then blamed me for being upset about it. Now it was time for me to stop pretending otherwise, and to start protecting myself with the same fierce determination my grandmother had shown when she fought to build a better life for her children. I owed her that much, and I owed myself even more. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that sometimes follows sleepless nights. I had not slept more than an hour or two total, my mind too active with plans and contingencies and the constant replay of my family's betrayal. But despite the exhaustion, I felt sharper and more focused than I had in months. The fog of shock that had engulfed me at that dinner table had burned away, leaving behind something harder and more purposeful. I was done being the accommodating daughter who absorbed mistreatment without complaint. I was done protecting people who had never protected me. I called my office at 7 in the morning and left a message that I would be taking a personal day. I had accumulated weeks of unused vacation time and sick leave because I hoarded it obsessively, always afraid that a bad flare of symptoms might force me to miss work and I would need those days to avoid losing my job. The irony was not lost on me that I had denied myself rest and recovery to maintain that safety net while my family had felt entitled to steal money that would have actually addressed the medical condition causing me to need that safety net in the first place. But that pattern ended now. I was taking the day off to handle a crisis, and my work would simply have to manage without me. At exactly 8 o'clock, I called Mr. Hernandez's office. His secretary answered with professional warmth and asked how she could help me. I identified myself and explained that I needed to speak with Mr. Hernandez urgently about my grandmother's estate. She put me on hold, and I waited with my heart pounding, half afraid that he would be unavailable or that I would have to wait days for an appointment. But after less than a minute, his familiar voice came on the line. "Elena, good morning. How can I help you today?" His tone was pleasant but contained a note of concern, probably because urgent calls about settled estates usually meant problems. I took a deep breath and launched into the explanation I had been rehearsing in my mind since 3 in the morning. I told him about the family dinner, about discovering that my mother had distributed the $40,000 to various family members for purposes having nothing to do with my medical care, about my upcoming surgery that could no longer be paid for, about my family's reaction when I confronted them about the theft. I kept my voice as steady as possible, presenting the facts without excessive emotion, though I could hear it wavering occasionally when I described the most painful moments. Mr. Hernandez was silent for a long moment after I finished. Then he said something that both validated my perception and terrified me with its implications. "Elena, what your mother did was not just inappropriate. It was illegal. She violated her fiduciary duty as trustee, and she may have committed criminal theft depending on how the district attorney's office chooses to view the situation. I am deeply sorry this has happened. Your grandmother would be devastated to know her explicit wishes were disregarded so completely." Hearing him confirm that my mother had broken the law sent a wave of vindication through me, followed immediately by a crushing weight of dread. This was real. This was not a family disagreement that could be resolved through conversation or compromise. This was actual legal wrongdoing that would require actual legal remedies. The path forward would involve attorneys and possibly courts and certainly the complete destruction of whatever remained of my relationship with my family. For a moment I wavered. Could I really do this? Could I really take legal action against my own mother? Then I remembered her casual dismissal of my illness, her suggestion that I should just postpone surgery that had taken 6 years to schedule, her complete lack of remorse or even acknowledgement that she had done something wrong. I remembered my siblings accepting stolen money without questioning where it came from, or whether they had any right to it. I remembered my father's passive refusal to acknowledge the problem, much less help resolve it. I remembered my grandmother's letter, her explicit instructions that this money was for me and only me, her trust that had been so thoroughly betrayed. The moment of wavering passed. What are my options? I asked Mr. Hernandez, my voice steadier now. How do I get that money back? How do I make sure this can never happen again? He explained the situation with the patient clarity of someone who had handled many difficult family legal matters over his decades of practice. As trustee, my mother had been legally obligated to manage the funds according to the terms my grandmother had established. By using the money for purposes explicitly prohibited in the trust documents, she had breached her fiduciary duty. The first step would be to send her a formal legal demand letter requiring her to account for all funds in the trust and to immediately restore the money she had improperly distributed. The letter would give her 14 days to comply before further legal action would be initiated. What if she refuses? I asked, though I already knew the answer. My mother would absolutely refuse. She had convinced herself that she had done nothing wrong, that the money was family money to be distributed as she saw fit, and she would fight any attempt to hold her accountable. Mr. Hernandez confirmed my suspicion with his response. If she refused to comply with the demand letter, we would file a petition with the probate court to remove her as trustee and to compel her to restore the funds. We would also report the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution, though he cautioned that criminal cases were harder to pursue and often took much longer to resolve than civil matters. I need to be honest with you about what this process will involve, Mr. Hernandez continued, his tone gentle but firm. This will not be quick or easy. Your mother will likely hire her own attorney. Your family will almost certainly close ranks against you. The proceedings could take months, possibly longer. There will be court appearances and depositions and significant emotional strain. And even if we are successful in compelling your mother to restore the funds, actually collecting that money may be difficult if she and your siblings have already spent it. You need to be prepared for all of that before you decide to move forward. I closed my eyes and thought about what he was telling me. Months of legal battles with my family, court appearances where I would have to face my mother and siblings and testify about what they had done. The very real possibility that even if I won, I might never recover the money because they had already spent it on trucks and mortgages and tuition. The absolute certainty that my family would hate me for pursuing this, and would do everything possible to paint me as the villain. It was daunting. It was terrifying. It was potentially futile. And it was absolutely necessary. I want to move forward, I said. Send the demand letter. File whatever paperwork needs to be filed. I understand this will be difficult, but doing nothing would be worse. My grandmother trusted me to use that money for my health, and my family stole it. I cannot just accept that and pretend it is okay. Mr. Hernandez made a sound of approval. I think that is the right decision, though I know it is not an easy one. I will draft the demand letter today and have it sent to your mother by certified mail. I will also prepare the initial court filings so we are ready to move quickly if she does not comply. In the meantime, I need you to document everything. Write down exactly what was said at that dinner, who was present, what your mother admitted to. If you have any text messages or emails from family members about this situation, preserve all of those. The more documentation we have, the stronger our case will be. I promised to put together a comprehensive written account of everything that had happened and to forward any relevant communications. We discussed his fees, which would need to be paid regardless of whether we successfully recovered the stolen money. I had some savings I could use for legal expenses, though it would deplete the emergency fund I had carefully built over years. But what choice did I have? Without legal intervention, I would never see that money again. My surgery would have to be postponed indefinitely. My family would continue to believe they could exploit me without consequences. And my grandmother's explicit wishes would remain dishonored. The legal fees were worth it if there was any chance of making this right. After ending the call with Mr. Hernandez, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began writing out everything I could remember from the dinner. I documented who had been present, what time I had arrived, how the conversation had unfolded, every specific statement I could recall. I wrote down my mother's exact words when she revealed they had used the money. I described my father's refusal to intervene, Marcus's admission that he had taken money for his mortgage, Daniela's tearful apology that had not included any offer to return what she had taken. I detailed my mother's dismissal of my illness as supposed rather than real, her suggestion that I postpone surgery, her accusation that I was selfish for being upset about the theft. The document grew to 8 single-spaced pages. A comprehensive record of betrayal that was painful to write but necessary to preserve. Next, I went through my phone and began taking screenshots of text messages from family members. My mother had sent 17 messages since I left the dinner, ranging from angry accusations to attempts at guilt manipulation. How could you walk out like that in front of the children? You embarrassed the entire family. Your father is very upset about your behavior. You owe him an apology. I did what I thought was best for everyone. You have always been ungrateful for everything this family has done for you. If you continue with this attitude, you are going to find yourself very alone. Each message revealed more about her mindset than she probably intended, showing someone who viewed herself as the victim despite being the perpetrator of theft. Marcus had sent several messages as well, attempting to justify his acceptance of money he must have known was not intended for him. Mom said there was extra money from Grandma's estate, and that it was okay to use it for family emergencies. We were going to lose our house. What was I supposed to do? His messages contained no acknowledgement that he had taken money designated for my medical expenses, no offer to return it or help me recover it, just excuses and implied accusations that I was being unreasonable to expect otherwise. Jennifer had added her own messages defending Marcus and suggesting that my anger was disproportionate to the situation. We are all family here. Family helps each other. You are acting like Marcus committed some crime when all he did was accept help when we desperately needed it. Daniela's messages were the most emotionally manipulative, playing on our previously close relationship, and my role as the older sister who had always helped her. I cannot believe you are doing this. I thought we were close. I thought you understood how hard things have been for me. I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me? What I wanted apparently was something she could not or would not provide, which was actual restitution rather than empty apologies. I wanted her to acknowledge that taking money designated for my surgery to pay for her elective graduate program was wrong. I wanted her to offer to return the money or at least to contribute to replacing it. But none of that appeared in her messages, just wounded protestations that I was being mean to her by not immediately forgiving and forgetting. I saved all the screenshots to a folder and sent them to Mr. Hernandez as he had requested. Then I turned my attention to the more immediate crisis. My surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks from tomorrow. Without the $40,000 my grandmother had left me, I could not afford the procedure. I needed to contact Dr. Chen's office and explain the situation, though I dreaded that conversation. What would I even say? My family stole the money that was supposed to pay for this surgery, so I need to postpone indefinitely until I can somehow come up with $38,000? It was humiliating and enraging in equal measure. I called the surgical coordinator at Dr. Chen's office and asked to speak with her about a problem with my upcoming procedure. Lisa, the coordinator I had been working with for months, came on the line with her usual cheerful professionalism. Hi, Elena. I was actually just thinking about you. We received the authorization from your grandmother's estate attorney last week, so we are all set for your surgery on the 14th. Do you have questions about the pre-op instructions? Her words hit me like a physical blow. They had received authorization. That meant Mr. Hernandez had sent the paperwork allowing the funds to be disbursed to the hospital. That meant my mother had known for at least a week that my surgery was scheduled, and that the money would be needed soon. And she had said nothing. She had let me believe everything was arranged while knowing she had already stolen the funds that were supposed to pay for my medical care. Lisa, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it, there has been a problem with the payment. The money that was supposed to be in that trust account has been misappropriated. I am working with the attorney to resolve it, but I do not think it will be resolved by the 14th. I am so sorry, but I think we need to postpone the surgery. The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. Then Lisa spoke, her voice still professional but now tinged with concern and sympathy. Oh, Elena, I am so sorry to hear that. Let me pull up your file and see what our options are. I heard typing in the background as she accessed my information. Okay, so the total cost of the surgery and the hospital stay is going to be $38,200. That is the negotiated rate because we had the estate payment arranged. If you want to postpone and reschedule for a later date, we can certainly do that. But I do need to tell you that Dr. Chen's schedule is extremely full. The next available surgical slot would be in late September, about 7 months from now. And there is no guarantee that the rate would remain the same if we are not receiving payment from the estate account. 7 months. 7 more months of progressive disease, of pain that made it difficult to work or sleep or function normally, of watching my fertility window close as the endometriosis caused more scarring and damage. 7 months of knowing that my family had stolen my chance at relief and felt no remorse about it. I felt tears burning behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. I would not cry on the phone with the surgical coordinator. I would not let my family's betrayal take even more from me than they had already stolen. Is there any way to keep my current surgery date while I work on resolving the payment issue? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Could I set up a payment plan or use medical financing or something? Lisa's response was sympathetic but firm. Unfortunately, for elective surgeries, we require payment in full before the procedure. We can work with medical financing companies, but the approval process usually takes several weeks, and they require credit checks and income verification. With your surgery scheduled in less than 2 weeks, there probably is not enough time to arrange that kind of financing. I am really sorry, Elena. I know you have been waiting a long time for this surgery. I thanked her for her help and asked her to keep my file active while I figured out what to do. She promised to hold my surgery slot for another week before releasing it, which was more consideration than she technically had to provide. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on me. My surgery would have to be postponed for 7 months because my family had stolen the money that would have paid for it. 7 months during which the disease would continue progressing, during which I would continue suffering, during which I would watch the opportunity for the life I wanted slip further away. And my family felt they had done nothing wrong. The rage that swept through me then was unlike anything I had experienced before. It was not the hot explosive anger that comes and goes quickly. It was something colder and more enduring, a fury born from absolute clarity about the injustice of what had been done to me. My family had stolen my health, my future. My grandmother's gift that had been given with such love and such explicit instructions. They had done it casually, without hesitation, without any apparent understanding or care about the consequences for me. And then they had blamed me for being upset about it, painting me as selfish and dramatic and ungrateful when I dared to object to their theft. That was not acceptable. That was not something I could forgive or overlook or work around. That required a response, and it required a response that matched the severity of what had been done to me. I called Mr. Hernandez back and told him about my conversation with the surgical coordinator, about the week deadline before my surgery slot would be released, about the 7-month wait for the next available date. I told him about the authorization his office had sent to the hospital, meaning my mother had known for at least a week that the funds would be needed soon and had said nothing. His anger on my behalf was evident in his voice when he responded. That makes the betrayal even more egregious. She knew you had surgery scheduled. She knew the money would be needed. And she said nothing because she had already taken it and spent it. Elena, I am going to expedite everything I can. I will have the demand letter delivered tomorrow instead of waiting for regular mail service. I will file the court petition by the end of this week. But you need to understand that even moving as quickly as possible, we almost certainly cannot get this resolved in time for your surgery next week. I understand, I said, though understanding did not make it easier to accept. Do whatever you can. At this point, I am less focused on keeping my surgery date than I am on making sure my family faces consequences for what they have done. They need to understand that stealing from me was not acceptable, and that I am not going to just let this go. Mr. Hernandez assured me he would move forward with maximum urgency, and we ended the call. I spent the rest of the afternoon documenting everything else I could think of that might be relevant to the case. I created a timeline of my medical history with endometriosis, showing the progression of the disease and the increasing severity of symptoms over 6 years. I compiled records of all the conservative treatments I had tried before surgery became necessary. I gathered documentation of my work history and income, establishing that I had been financially responsible and self-sufficient throughout my adult life. I wanted the court to understand that I was not asking for money I did not deserve or making frivolous claims. I was fighting to recover an inheritance that had been legally and morally mine, taken by people who had no right to it. By early evening, I had created a comprehensive file with dozens of pages of documentation, communications, and supporting evidence. I sent everything to Mr. Hernandez along with a note thanking him for his help and his urgency in addressing this situation. Then I turned my phone back on after having it silenced for hours while I worked. I had 37 new notifications, a mix of calls, voicemails, and text messages from various family members who had apparently been comparing notes about how unreasonable I was being. I read through them systematically, saving anything that might be useful as evidence of their attitudes and admissions. One message stood out from the others, though not in a good way. It was from my mother, and the tone had shifted from defensiveness to threats. I spoke with a lawyer today, and he told me that what you are doing is harassment. If you continue making false accusations against your family, I will have no choice but to take legal action against you for defamation. I am your mother, Elena. You need to stop this nonsense right now before you do permanent damage to this family. Whatever problems you think exist, we can work them out privately without involving lawyers and courts. Call me so we can discuss this like adults. I read the message 3 times, analyzing what it revealed. My mother had consulted an attorney, which meant she knew her actions had legal implications. She was threatening to sue me for defamation, which was absurd since everything I had stated was true and documented. She was calling my accurate description of her theft false accusations, attempting to flip the narrative so that I became the aggressor rather than the victim. And she was demanding that I handle this privately, which really meant she wanted me to drop my legal challenge and accept the theft without consequences. The message made me even more determined to see this through. If my mother thought threats and intimidation would make me back down, she was about to discover how wrong she was. I did not respond to her message or to any of the others from family members. There was nothing to say to them that would not potentially complicate the legal case Mr. Hernandez was building. Instead, I forwarded my mother's threatening message to him with a note asking whether I should be concerned about her defamation claims. He responded within an hour, assuring me that I had nothing to worry about. Truth was an absolute defense against defamation, and since everything I had said about my mother's actions was true and could be proven through documentation, her threats were empty. He suspected her attorney had probably told her the same thing, but that she was attempting to intimidate me anyway. That night, I tried to sleep but found it nearly impossible despite my exhaustion. My mind kept churning through everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen, and all the ways this situation could potentially resolve or deteriorate further. I thought about the upcoming court proceedings and what it would be like to face my mother in that setting. I thought about my siblings and whether they would testify against me or would be forced to admit their complicity in taking money they knew was not theirs. I thought about my extended family and how they would respond when they learned about the situation. Most of all, I thought about my grandmother and what she would want me to do. I knew the answer to that question. She would want me to fight. She would want me to stand up for myself and refuse to be exploited. She would want me to honor her gift by doing everything possible to use it for the purpose she had intended. She had fought her entire life for her family's well-being, and she would expect me to fight for mine. So that was what I would do. I would fight with everything I had, and I would not stop fighting until justice was done or until I had exhausted every possible avenue for achieving it. My family had made a choice when they stole from me. Now they would live with the consequences of that choice, regardless of how much they protested or how hard they tried to paint me as the villain. The truth was simple. They had stolen something that belonged to me, something my grandmother had protected for me, something I desperately needed for my health and future, and I was going to get it back. The demand letter arrived at my parents' house on Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a courier service that required a signature upon receipt. I knew the exact moment my mother received it, because my phone exploded with incoming calls and messages within minutes of the delivery. I had silenced notifications from my family members, but I could see the screen lighting up repeatedly as they tried to reach me, tried to convince me to stop this legal action before it went any further, tried to make me feel guilty for doing what was necessary to protect my rights. I ignored every attempt at contact and instead focused on the next steps Mr. Hernandez and I had discussed. The demand letter was direct and unambiguous. It outlined the terms of my grandmother's trust, the specific language designating the $40,000 exclusively for my medical expenses related to endometriosis, and my mother's legal obligation as trustee to manage those funds according to those explicit instructions. It detailed how she had violated her fiduciary duty by distributing the money to my siblings for purposes completely unrelated to my medical care. It demanded that she provide a full accounting of all funds in the trust within 7 business days, and that she restore the improperly distributed funds within 14 days. The letter concluded by stating that failure to comply would result in immediate legal action, including a petition to remove her as trustee, and a referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. Mr. Hernandez had not sugar-coated the situation or left any room for misinterpretation. The letter made clear that what my mother had done was not a family disagreement or a difference of opinion about how to use shared resources. It was a violation of law, a betrayal of trust, and a theft of my inheritance. Reading through the copy he had sent me, I felt a surge of validation. Someone with legal authority and decades of experience was confirming what I knew in my bones to be true. My mother had committed a serious wrong, and she needed to be held accountable for it. But I also knew that the demand letter, as necessary as it was, would escalate the conflict dramatically. My mother would not respond to it with remorse or immediate compliance. She would respond with rage and defensiveness, and an even more determined effort to paint herself as the victim. And she would recruit every family member and family friend she could find to support her narrative and pressure me to back down. I needed to prepare myself for that onslaught, needed to build my defenses both legal and emotional before the full force of my family's opposition came crashing down on me. Wednesday morning, I called Dr. Chen's office and spoke again with Lisa, the surgical coordinator. I explained that I was pursuing legal action to recover the stolen funds, but that the process would take time, certainly more time than the 1-week extension she had offered to hold my surgery slot. I asked her to officially postpone my surgery and put me on the waiting list for the next available date. Lisa's sympathy was genuine and evident in her voice as she processed the postponement, and she promised to notify me immediately if any earlier dates became available due to cancellations. But we both knew that was unlikely. My September surgery date was now fixed, barring some miracle. After ending that call, I sat in my apartment and confronted the reality of what I had just done. 7 months. 7 more months of living with a disease that was progressively destroying my reproductive organs, causing chronic pain, and limiting my ability to fully engage with life. 7 months of watching my fertility decline as I approached my 30th birthday, knowing that every passing month decreased my chances of ever having children if I wanted them. 7 months of continuing to rely on pain management strategies that were increasingly inadequate as the disease advanced. All because my family had stolen money that would have allowed me to address this condition now rather than later. The grief that washed over me was intense and suffocating. I had been so close to relief, so close to finally taking control of my health after years of feeling helpless against this disease. Dr. Chen had assured me that the surgery would significantly improve my quality of life and potentially preserve my fertility if we acted soon. But soon had just turned into 7 months from now, and I had no way of knowing what additional damage would occur during that delay. This was not just about money, though the theft of $40,000 was certainly significant. This was about my body, my future, my ability to live the life I wanted rather than the limited life my illness forced upon me. And my family had stolen that from me as casually as if they were borrowing my car without asking. I allowed myself an hour to sit with that grief, to cry in rage and feel the full weight of what had been taken from me. Then I dried my eyes, washed my face, and returned my attention to what I could control. I could not change the past. I could not make my surgery happen next week as originally planned. But I could fight to ensure my family faced consequences for what they had done. And I could fight to recover the money so that when September arrived, I would be able to afford the procedure without taking on crushing debt. Those were concrete goals I could work toward. Actions I could take that would honor my grandmother's gift and protect my own rights. Thursday afternoon, Mr. Hernandez called with an update. My mother had responded to the demand letter, but not through her own attorney as he had expected. Instead, she had sent a handwritten letter directly to his office, attempting to go around proper legal channels with an emotional appeal. He read portions of it to me over the phone, his tone suggesting he had seen this tactic many times before and was not impressed by it. She writes that she is devastated by your accusations, and cannot believe her own daughter would treat her this way after everything she has done for you over the years. She says the money was used for legitimate family needs and that your grandmother would have wanted the family to help each other. She suggests that you are being manipulated by lawyers who want to profit from family conflict. And she concludes by saying she will not be intimidated by legal threats, and that she has retained her own attorney to protect her rights. I listened to the summary of my mother's letter with a mixture of dark amusement and fresh anger. Of course she was claiming to be devastated and victimized. Of course she was invoking everything she had done for me over the years, as if past parental obligations somehow entitled her to steal my inheritance. Of course she was misrepresenting my grandmother's wishes, claiming that someone who had explicitly written that the money was for me, and only me, would have wanted it distributed to the entire family. And of course she had retained an attorney despite having no legal leg to stand on, because she was determined to fight accountability rather than simply returning what she had stolen. What happens next? I asked Mr. Hernandez, keeping my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. He explained that since my mother had not complied with the demand letter and had instead responded with defiance and threats of her own legal action, he would move forward with filing the petition in probate court. The petition would ask the court to remove my mother as trustee due to her breach of fiduciary duty, to compel her to provide a full accounting of the trust funds, and to order her to restore the money she had improperly distributed. We would also request that the court award attorney's fees and costs to be paid by my mother, since her misconduct had necessitated legal intervention. The filing will become a matter of public record, Mr. Hernandez warned. Once we file, anyone can access the court documents and read about what happened. Your mother will likely claim you are airing family business publicly to embarrass her. But we need to move forward through official channels to have any hope of recovering your inheritance. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I thought about his question carefully. Having the details of my family's dysfunction become public record was not something I relished. It would be embarrassing to have strangers able to read about how my own mother had stolen money designated for my medical care. It would give my extended family and my parents' social circle access to information that would certainly generate gossip and judgment. But the alternative was to stay silent, to allow my mother to keep what she had stolen, to teach my entire family that they could exploit me without consequences. That alternative was unacceptable. Yes, I told him firmly. I am prepared for that. File the petition. He promised to have it submitted to the court by the end of the day, and to send me a copy once it was filed. We discussed the likely timeline for the case, which could range from several months to over a year depending on how aggressively my mother's attorney chose to fight, and whether she would consider settling before going to trial. He cautioned me again that even if we won a judgment ordering her to restore the funds, actually collecting that money might prove difficult if she and my siblings had already spent it and had no assets we could attach. But he also emphasized that pursuing the case was important regardless of the financial outcome, because it would create a legal record of what had happened, and would make it much harder for my family to exploit me in the future. After we hung up, I spent time researching what would happen next in the legal process. I learned about probate court procedures, about how trustees could be removed for breach of fiduciary duty, about the burden of proof required to demonstrate financial misconduct. The more I read, the more confident I became that my case was strong. My grandmother's will and trust documents were unambiguous. The money had been designated specifically and exclusively for my medical expenses. My mother had distributed it for completely different purposes without my knowledge or consent. The facts were on my side, even if the emotional dynamics of suing my own mother were complicated and painful. That evening I received a phone call from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister who lived in California, and who I had always liked despite her tendency to avoid family conflict. She started the conversation with careful neutrality, saying she had heard there was some trouble in the family, and wanted to understand what was happening. I gave her a factual summary of the situation, explaining about my grandmother's bequest, the trust account designation for my medical expenses, my mother's distribution of the funds to my siblings, and my discovery of the theft at the family dinner. I kept my tone calm and matter-of-fact, presenting the information without excessive emotion or editorializing. Aunt Patricia was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said something I had not expected. "Elena, your mother called me yesterday and told me a very different version of this story. She said you were suing her because she helped your brother and sister when they were in financial trouble, and that you wanted all of your grandmother's money for yourself even though it was supposed to be divided among the family. But that is not what you are describing at all. What you are describing is that your grandmother left money specifically for your medical care, and your mother took it without permission. Is that accurate?" "Yes," I confirmed, feeling a spark of hope that at least one family member might see the situation clearly. "I have the legal documents that establish the trust and specify how the money was supposed to be used. I can send them to you if you want to see the actual language." She asked me to do that, and I immediately forwarded copies of the trust documents and my grandmother's letter to her email address. While we were still on the phone, I heard the notification sound indicating she had received the message. She was quiet again as she read through the documents, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of anger I had not heard before. "Elena, this is clear as day. Your grandmother explicitly stated that this money was for your medical expenses only. Your mother had no right to distribute it to anyone else for any reason. I am appalled that she would do this, and I am even more appalled that she lied to me about what happened. I want you to know that I support you completely in whatever legal action you need to take. What your mother did was wrong, and it dishonors Mama Rose's explicit wishes." Her words brought tears to my eyes, the first support I had received from any family member since this nightmare began. We talked for another 20 minutes, and Aunt Patricia shared that she had always worried about my mother's relationship with money and boundaries. She mentioned several incidents over the years where my mother had felt entitled to make decisions about family resources that were not hers to make, incidents I had not known about, but that fit perfectly with the pattern of behavior I had experienced. Before we ended the call, Aunt Patricia made me promise to keep her updated about the legal proceedings and offered to testify on my behalf if needed. She also warned me that the rest of the family would likely side with my mother regardless of the facts, because that was how family dynamics worked in our extended family. The older generation stuck together, and the younger generation was expected to defer to parental authority, regardless of circumstances. But she wanted me to know that at least one person understood that what had been done to me was unconscionable, and that I had every right to fight back. That conversation sustained me through the difficult days that followed. Friday morning, Mr. Hernandez sent me a copy of the petition he had filed with the probate court. Reading through the formal legal language describing my mother's breach of fiduciary duty, the misappropriation of trust funds, and the harm caused to me as the beneficiary made the situation feel both more real and somehow more manageable. This was no longer just a family fight with hurt feelings and competing narratives. This was a legal matter with documented facts, clear violations, and established procedures for resolution. The court would evaluate the evidence and make determinations based on law, rather than on who could manipulate emotions more effectively. For someone like me who valued logic and objective truth, that framework felt infinitely more fair than the chaotic emotional battlefield my family preferred. The petition requested several specific remedies. First, it asked the court to immediately remove my mother as trustee and appoint a neutral third party to manage any remaining trust assets. Second, it requested a full accounting of all funds that had been in the trust and documentation of how every dollar had been spent. Third, it demanded that my mother be ordered to restore the $40,000 that had been improperly distributed, with interest calculated from the date of each improper distribution. Fourth, it requested that my mother be ordered to pay my attorney's fees and costs associated with pursuing this action. Finally, it asked the court to refer the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation and prosecution. Reading that last request made my stomach clench with anxiety, and something that felt uncomfortably like guilt. Criminal prosecution. That could mean actual criminal charges against my mother. That could mean she might face penalties beyond just having to return the money. But then I reminded myself of what Mr. Hernandez had explained when we discussed this option. Trustees who steal from the people they are supposed to be protecting commit a serious crime, one that undermines the entire legal structure designed to safeguard vulnerable individuals. If trustees face no consequences beyond being required to return stolen funds, there would be no deterrent against this kind of abuse. Criminal prosecution existed precisely to address situations like mine, where someone in a position of trust had violated that trust for personal benefit. My mother had committed a crime. Asking the district attorney to evaluate whether charges were appropriate was not vindictive or excessive. It was simply acknowledging reality. The petition would be served on my mother formally, probably within the next few days, triggering the official start of the legal proceedings. She would have a specific period to respond, and then there would be hearings and potentially a trial if the matter could not be resolved through negotiation or settlement. Mr. Hernandez estimated that even moving efficiently, we were looking at least 4 to 6 months before a final resolution, possibly longer if my mother's attorney decided to employ delay tactics or if the court's calendar was particularly crowded. 4 to 6 months of legal battle, of court appearances, of having to repeatedly recount and prove what my family had done to me. It was daunting, but it was also necessary. That weekend, I focused on building the life I wanted to have beyond this legal battle. I had been so consumed with my family drama and my health crisis that I had neglected other aspects of my life that brought me joy and meaning. Saturday morning, I went for a long walk along the canal that ran through my neighborhood, letting the rhythm of movement and the sight of water calm my anxious mind. I had not exercised much recently because the pain had made it difficult, but this morning the pain was manageable and the movement felt good. I realized how much I had been living in a state of constant crisis, waiting for the next family demand or health setback, never quite able to relax or invest in activities that were just for enjoyment rather than obligation. Sunday afternoon, I met my friend Rachel for lunch at a small cafe we both loved. Rachel and I had been friends since college, and she was one of the few people in my life who had consistently shown up for me without expecting anything in return. I had not told her much about what was happening with my family because I had been too overwhelmed to articulate it, but over lunch I found myself sharing the whole story. She listened without interruption, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to outrage as I described the dinner revelation, the demand letter, and the court petition I had filed. When I finished, Rachel reached across the table and took my hand. "Elena, I am so sorry this is happening to you, but I want you to know that I am proud of you for fighting back. A lot of people would have just accepted it and tried to make the best of a terrible situation. You are standing up for yourself and refusing to be exploited, and that takes incredible courage." Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. My family had spent the past week telling me I was selfish, vindictive, ungrateful, and cruel for pursuing legal action against my own mother. Hearing someone I trusted and respected say that my choice took courage, rather than reflecting character flaws, helped counter some of the toxic messages I had been absorbing. Rachel asked what she could do to help, and I told her honestly that just having her listen and validate my experience was helpful. But she insisted on doing something more tangible, and together we brainstormed ideas. She offered to help me research medical financing options in case the legal proceedings did not resolve before my September surgery date. She suggested I might want to consider starting a private fundraising campaign among friends to help cover medical expenses, though I was not sure I was comfortable asking people for money. Most importantly, she reminded me that I had a support network beyond my family, people who cared about me and wanted to help me through this crisis. I had been so focused on what I had lost when my family betrayed me that I had not fully appreciated what I still had. Monday morning arrived with a call from Mr. Hernandez informing me that my mother had been formally served with the court petition over the weekend. He expected to receive a response from her attorney within the next week or two, and that response would indicate whether she intended to fight the petition, or whether there might be room for settlement negotiations. He reminded me that settlement was often preferable to extended litigation because it resolved matters more quickly and with more certainty, but that any settlement would need to include full restoration of the stolen funds plus my attorney's fees. I told him I understood and that I was willing to consider settlement if my mother was serious about making things right, but that I would not accept any agreement that did not include complete repayment and her removal as trustee. That afternoon, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize with the local area code. Against my better judgment, I answered it. The voice on the other end belonged to my mother's attorney, a man named Donald Breslin, who introduced himself with professional courtesy before getting directly to the point. He said he was calling to see if there was any possibility of resolving this matter without extended litigation that would be expensive and emotionally difficult for everyone involved. I told him I was represented by counsel, and that any settlement discussion should go through Mr. Hernandez. But he persisted, suggesting that perhaps we could have a preliminary conversation just to understand each other's positions before involving the attorneys and adding more costs to an already expensive situation. Something about his approach made me wary. I suspected he was trying to get me to say something he could use against me in court, or to pressure me into accepting a settlement that did not fully protect my rights. I politely but firmly told him that I would not discuss the case with him directly and ended the call. Then I immediately called Mr. Hernandez and reported the conversation. He was not surprised and confirmed my instinct had been correct. Defense attorneys sometimes tried to contact opposing parties directly in hopes of catching them without legal guidance and getting concessions or statements that could be exploited later. He would send Mr. Breslin a formal letter instructing him that all communications must go through legal counsel, and that any further attempts to contact me directly would be reported to the State Bar Association as unethical conduct. That evening, I received an email from my father. It was the first direct communication I had received from him since the dinner, and I opened it with both curiosity and apprehension. The message was brief and somewhat awkward, clearly uncomfortable for a man who had spent his life avoiding emotional confrontation and difficult conversations. He wrote that he understood I was upset about the money situation and that perhaps my mother had not handled things ideally, but that I needed to understand she had been trying to help the entire family and had not meant any harm. He suggested that maybe we could all sit down together and work out a payment plan where my siblings could gradually repay the money they had received, avoiding the need for lawyers and courts and all the drama that came with legal proceedings. He concluded by saying he hoped I would reconsider my current course of action because it was tearing the family apart and causing my mother tremendous stress. I read the email 3 times, analyzing what it said and what it did not say. My father acknowledged that my mother had not handled things ideally, which was the closest thing to admission of wrongdoing I was likely to get from him. But he still framed the situation as my mother trying to help rather than my mother stealing from me, and he suggested that harm had not been intended as if that somehow excused the theft. His proposed solution of a voluntary payment plan from my siblings was laughable. My siblings had no intention of repaying anything, and without legal compulsion they would simply make excuses and empty promises indefinitely. And his final comments about me tearing the family apart and causing my mother stress perfectly encapsulated the dynamic I had been subjected to my entire life. When my family hurt me, I was expected to absorb that hurt quietly. But when I defended myself and created consequences for their actions, I became responsible for the resulting distress. I did not respond to my father's email. There was nothing I could say that would bridge the fundamental disconnect between us. He would never understand that sometimes families tear apart because the people in them commit unforgivable betrayals, not because the victims of those betrayals seek justice. He would never acknowledge that my mother's stress was a consequence of her own actions rather than my response to those actions. And he would never prioritize my well-being over his desire to avoid conflict and maintain the illusion that everything was fine. So I saved his email to the legal case file and moved on. I had drawn my line in the sand. I had filed legal action to recover what had been stolen from me. I had established boundaries that my family could no longer violate without facing real consequences. And I had committed to seeing this fight through regardless of how much my family protested, or how hard they tried to paint me as the villain. They had made their choice when they stole from me. Now I had made mine. And there was no going back. The week following the official service of the court petition brought a strange new rhythm to my life. I woke each morning with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, wondering what new development or family attack the day would bring. But I also woke with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. A clarity about who I was and what I stood for that came from finally refusing to accept mistreatment. The cognitive dissonance between these two states, anxiety and empowerment, created an emotional landscape that was exhausting to navigate, but I was learning that growth often felt uncomfortable before it felt natural. Mr. Hernandez had advised me to begin building a comprehensive support structure for the legal battle ahead. He explained that cases like mine were not won solely on legal merits, though we certainly had those on our side. They were also won by demonstrating to the court that the plaintiff was credible, reliable, and genuinely harmed by the defendant's actions. To accomplish that, I would need documentation from medical professionals about my condition and the urgency of treatment, character witnesses who could testify to my integrity and my family's pattern of exploitation, and financial records that showed both my responsible money management and my inability to pay for surgery without the inheritance my grandmother had left me. I started with the medical documentation. Tuesday morning, I called Dr. Chen's office and explained to Lisa that I was involved in legal proceedings related to the theft of funds designated for my surgery. I asked if Dr. Chen would be willing to provide a letter documenting my diagnosis, the progression of my endometriosis over the years of treatment, the medical necessity of the surgical intervention she had recommended, and the potential consequences of delaying that surgery for an extended period. Lisa said she would speak with Dr. Chen and get back to me, which she did by that afternoon. Dr. Chen had agreed to provide the documentation and would have it ready within a few days. When the letter arrived at the end of the week, I read it with tears streaming down my face. Dr. Chen had written 3 single-space pages detailing my medical history with a level of care and attention that made clear she genuinely understood what I had been dealing with. She described the initial symptoms that had brought me to her practice 6 years ago, the diagnostic procedures that had confirmed severe endometriosis with adhesions affecting multiple organs, and the progressive worsening of the condition despite every conservative treatment option we had attempted. She explained that endometriosis was not simply painful periods, as many people mistakenly believed, but a serious disease where tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus, causing inflammation, scarring, and potential organ damage. Dr. Chen's letter went on to describe the specific surgical procedure she had recommended: a laparoscopic excision surgery to remove endometrial implants and adhesions, while preserving as much healthy tissue as possible. She explained that this surgery was time-sensitive because endometriosis was a progressive disease, meaning that delay allowed for additional tissue growth and scarring that could make the surgery more complex and less effective. She noted that my fertility was already at risk due to the extent of the disease, and that further delay could result in permanent infertility even if I eventually underwent surgical treatment. She concluded by stating that in her professional medical opinion, postponing this surgery for financial reasons rather than medical reasons represented a significant threat to my long-term health and reproductive potential. Reading Dr. Chen's clinical description of what I had been living with for years gave me a strange sense of validation. Here was objective medical evidence that my suffering was real, that my need for surgery was legitimate and urgent, and that the theft of my medical funds had caused genuine harm that extended far beyond the financial loss. This was not me being dramatic or self-centered or ungrateful, as my mother had suggested. This was me dealing with a serious medical condition that required treatment that had been stolen from me by people who should have protected me. I added Dr. Chen's letter to my ever-growing file of documentation and sent a copy to Mr. Hernandez, who confirmed it would be powerful evidence in our case. Next, I turned my attention to gathering financial documentation that would demonstrate both my fiscal responsibility and the devastating impact of losing my inheritance. I pulled together 5 years of tax returns showing my steady employment and reasonable income. I compiled bank statements showing consistent savings deposits and responsible spending patterns, evidence that I lived within my means and planned for the future, rather than spending frivolously. I gathered records of my student loan payments, showing that I had borrowed relatively little for college and had been steadily paying down that debt ahead of schedule. I collected documentation of my retirement account contributions, my renter's insurance payments, my modest but consistent charitable donations, and every other indicator that I was a financially responsible adult who managed money carefully. Then I documented what the endometriosis had cost me financially over 6 years. I compiled records of insurance premiums, co-pays for countless doctor's appointments, prescription costs for pain medication and hormonal treatments, emergency room visits during particularly severe flare-ups, and medical equipment like heating pads and TENS units that provided temporary relief. The total was staggering: over $70,000 spent on managing a condition that could potentially be addressed through the surgery my grandmother's money was supposed to fund. I had essentially paid for the surgery twice over in management costs, but without the surgery itself, those costs would continue indefinitely with no resolution. I also documented the professional costs of my illness. I pulled my work attendance record showing the days I had missed due to pain, the vacation time I had used for medical appointments rather than actual vacation, and the overtime hours I could not work because I was too exhausted or in too much pain. I calculated the promotions I had likely missed because my illness sometimes affected my performance, the professional development opportunities one had turned down because I could not commit to travel or extended training when I never knew when a bad flare would hit. While these costs were less tangible than the direct medical expenses, they represented real career damage that had resulted from dealing with an untreated progressive disease. Compiling all of this information was emotionally exhausting. Each document represented a sacrifice I had made, a limitation I had accepted, a dream I had deferred because I was living with a condition that my family dismissed as exaggerated complaints about bad periods. But it was also empowering to see the full scope of what I had been dealing with laid out objectively. Anyone looking at this documentation would understand that I had been fighting a serious battle for years, that I had handled it with responsibility and maturity, and that the loss of my inheritance was not merely inconvenient but potentially life-altering. As I worked on building my legal case, I also focused on building my emotional support network. Rachel had offered to help, and I took her up on that offer by asking her to connect me with other friends who might be willing to provide character references if needed. She organized a small dinner at her apartment with 3 other women from our college friend group, women I had stayed in touch with over the years but who I had not been as close to recently because I had been so consumed with managing my illness and dealing with my family's demands. The dinner turned into an unexpected therapy session, as I shared the full story of what had happened with my grandmother's inheritance. These women, who had known me for nearly a decade, were uniformly outraged on my behalf. They reminded me of times they had seen my family take advantage of me, incidents I had minimized or forgotten, but that they remembered clearly. Sarah recalled a time when my brother had borrowed my car for what he said was a quick errand and had kept it for 3 days, leaving me without transportation to get to work. Monica remembered when my sister had asked to stay with me for a weekend, and had ended up living in my apartment for 6 weeks without offering to pay rent or even buy groceries. Jessica brought up multiple occasions when I had canceled plans with friends because my family had demanded my time at the last minute, treating my commitments to others as less important than their spontaneous needs. Hearing these stories from their perspective was revelatory. I had always rationalized my family's behavior, telling myself that family came first, and that their needs were somehow more legitimate than my other obligations. But my friends saw it differently. They saw a pattern of exploitation where I was consistently expected to sacrifice while receiving nothing in return. They saw family members who felt entitled to my time, money, and energy without offering basic respect or consideration. And they saw me slowly depleting myself trying to meet impossible expectations from people who would never be satisfied. Their validation of my experience helped counter the toxic messages my family had been sending, the accusations that I was selfish and ungrateful and cruel for defending myself. All 3 women offered to provide written statements or testify in court, if needed, about their observations of how my family treated me, and about my character and integrity. They also offered more immediate practical support. Sarah, who worked in medical billing, offered to help me research financial assistance programs and payment plans that might help cover my surgery costs if the legal case was not resolved by September. Monica, who had connections in the local media, cautiously suggested that if I wanted to go public with my story, she knew reporters who covered family legal issues and might be interested in highlighting how trust laws were supposed to protect vulnerable beneficiaries. Jessica, who was a therapist, offered to provide free counseling sessions to help me process the trauma of family betrayal and develop coping strategies for the stress of litigation. I was moved to tears by their generosity and support. These women owed me nothing, yet they were offering time, expertise, and emotional labor to help me through this crisis. The contrast with my biological family, who felt entitled to everything I had while offering nothing in return, could not have been more stark. It reinforced a lesson I was slowly learning, that family was not determined by blood, but by who showed up with genuine care and support when you needed it most. My friends were more family to me than my relatives had ever been. Over the following days, I began documenting the pattern of financial exploitation my family had subjected me to over the years. I went through old emails, text messages, and bank records to create a comprehensive timeline of every time a family member had asked me for money, time, or resources. The pattern was even more egregious than I had realized when I viewed it as isolated incidents rather than as a systemic dynamic. In the 7 years since I had graduated from college and started my career, my family had extracted over $30,000 from me in various forms. There were the obvious direct requests, loans for car repairs that were never repaid, help with utility bills during alleged emergencies, contributions to my nieces and nephews' expensive birthday parties and Christmas gifts. But there were also the less obvious extractions, the countless hours of free babysitting that would have cost hundreds of dollars if my brother had hired a professional service. The furniture and household items I had given to family members when they claimed they could not afford to buy their own, items that had cost me thousands of dollars to purchase. The groceries I routinely bought when visiting my parents because my mother would complain about not having enough food in the house, despite the fact that both she and my father received regular income. The gas money spent driving across the city multiple times a week to help with various family needs, while my own needs went unmet. When I added it all up, the total was staggering. I had given my family over $30,000 in direct financial support over 7 years, plus countless hours of unpaid labor and emotional support. And what had I received in return? Not support during my health crisis. Not respect for my boundaries or appreciation for my generosity. Not even basic consideration when they decided to steal my inheritance. Instead, I received criticism for not doing more, accusations of selfishness when I finally said I could not afford to keep giving, and betrayal when I actually needed help for once. The inequity was breathtaking when laid out objectively. I sent this documentation to Mr. Hernandez along with a memo explaining the pattern I had identified. He responded enthusiastically, saying this information would be valuable for demonstrating to the court that the theft of my inheritance was not an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of years of financial exploitation. It would help establish that I had every reason to distrust my family with financial matters, and that my grandmother had been wise to try to protect my inheritance with specific legal restrictions that my mother had then violated. As I built my case, I also had to navigate the ongoing harassment from family members who were increasingly desperate to make me drop the legal action. My email inbox and voicemail were constantly full of messages from various relatives, each trying a different approach to pressure me into backing down. Some took the guilt approach, telling me how much stress I was causing my mother, and how I was destroying the family. Others tried intimidation, warning me that I was burning bridges I would regret burning later when I needed family support. A few attempted manipulation, suggesting that my grandmother would be ashamed of me for suing my own mother, and that I was dishonoring her memory by creating this conflict. The most insidious messages came from relatives who pretended to be neutral mediators concerned about family unity. My uncle Robert, my father's brother, called and suggested that perhaps everyone had overreacted, and that we should all get together for a family meeting to discuss things calmly and rationally. When I pointed out that there was nothing to discuss since my mother had stolen legally protected funds and needed to return them, he accused me of being unwilling to compromise and suggested that my rigid thinking was the real problem. My cousin Michelle sent a long email about the importance of forgiveness and moving forward, completely bypassing the facts of what had happened and framing the situation as a personal disagreement rather than theft. I developed a standard response to all of these messages, one I had worked out with Mr. Hernandez to ensure I did not inadvertently say something that could be used against me legally. I simply stated that the matter was in litigation, and that I would not be discussing it outside of proper legal channels. I invited anyone who wanted to understand the situation to request copies of the court filings, which were public record and laid out the facts clearly. And I asked that people respect my need to step back from family interactions while the legal case proceeded. Most people did not respond well to this boundary, which told me everything I needed to know about their actual concerns and motivations. The one family member who continued to respect my boundaries was Aunt Patricia, who called regularly just to check on how I was doing emotionally and to offer continued support. She shared that she had spoken with several other relatives and had attempted to explain to them what had actually happened versus what my mother was telling people. Most had not wanted to hear the truth, preferring to believe my mother's version where she was the victim of her ungrateful daughter's vindictiveness. But Patricia had planted seeds of doubt, and she suspected that when the court case actually proceeded and evidence became public, some people would have to confront the reality that my mother had lied to them. Patricia also shared something that gave me additional insight into my mother's psychology. Apparently, my grandmother had loaned my mother and father money several times over the years when they had financial difficulties. Each time, my grandmother had expected repayment and had been very clear that the money was a loan, not a gift. But my parents had never fully repaid any of those loans, always finding reasons why they could not afford to make payments, always promising they would pay back everything eventually. My grandmother had eventually stopped asking for repayment, writing off the money as lost, but she had also stopped offering financial help because she recognized that my parents viewed family money as communal resources to which everyone was entitled rather than as personal property with clear ownership. This pattern explains so much about why my grandmother had structured my inheritance the way she had. She had known from experience that my mother did not respect financial boundaries or obligations. She had tried to protect my inheritance by creating legal restrictions that should have prevented misuse. But she had underestimated the extent of my mother's sense of entitlement, her willingness to violate explicit legal constraints when she decided that she knew better than her own mother how the money should be used. That knowledge made me even more determined to see this case through to its conclusion. I was not just fighting for myself. I was honoring my grandmother's wishes and her attempt to protect me even after her death. By the end of that week, I had assembled an impressive case file. I had medical documentation establishing the severity of my condition and the necessity of treatment. I had financial records demonstrating both my fiscal responsibility and the pattern of family exploitation. I had character witnesses willing to testify about my integrity and my family's treatment of me. I had detailed timelines, documented communications, and objective evidence that supported every claim I was making. Most importantly, I had the unambiguous legal documents my grandmother had created, documents that left no doubt about her intentions or my mother's violations. Mr. Hernandez reviewed everything I had compiled and called to tell me he was impressed by the thoroughness of my preparation. He said that many clients in situations like mine were so emotionally overwhelmed that they struggled to organize information effectively, but that I had created a case file that would make his job significantly easier. He also confirmed that my mother's attorney had filed a formal response to our petition, and it was about what he had expected. Her response denied any wrongdoing, claimed that the trust terms were ambiguous about how the money could be used, suggested that my grandmother had actually intended for the money to benefit the whole family with me having priority but not exclusivity, and accused me of being motivated by greed rather than genuine need. Reading my mother's legal response was painful despite my attempts to maintain emotional distance. She was not just defending her actions. She was actively lying about my grandmother's intentions, claiming ambiguity where none existed, and portraying me as a greedy opportunist rather than as someone fighting to recover stolen medical funds. But Mr. Hernandez assured me that her response was weak and would not hold up under scrutiny. The trust documents were unambiguous. My grandmother's letter was explicit, and my mother had provided no evidence whatsoever to support her alternative interpretation of the terms. We would demolish her defense, but it would take time and continued effort. As I prepared for the long legal battle ahead, I realized something important. Gathering resources and support was not just about building a legal case. It was about building a foundation for the life I wanted to have after this crisis resolved, whatever the outcome. I was learning to identify people who genuinely cared about me versus those who only valued what I could provide them. I was developing skills in setting boundaries and refusing to accept mistreatment, even when that refusal created conflict. I was discovering that I was stronger and more capable than I had believed, able to navigate complex legal processes and stand up to people who had intimidated me for decades. And I was beginning to understand that sometimes the hardest and most important thing you could do was fight for yourself, even when everyone around you told you that you were wrong to do so. These lessons would serve me long after the court case concluded. They were resources I was gathering that no one could ever steal from me, strengths that would protect me for the rest of my life. And that realization gave me hope that regardless of how the legal battle ended, I was already winning the war for my own dignity and autonomy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.